The background of our study continues to be exciting. Maybe we use that word. Certainly not subtle. There's always seems to be something. If it's not a war, then it's not a war with armies and bullets and bombs. It's a war, a culture war. And it's my hope that we find this hour as some solace to that, some perhaps inspiration in how to interact with others. We have great hope for more of the hostages to be released over Shabbat and more in the coming weeks. We have significant pessimism as to how many are still alive in Gaza. The number seems to be relatively low, although sources are not saying how many, but the number of guaranteed live hostages has gone lower over the last few days and weeks. At the same time, we can only imagine what it's like for those returning to Gaza and southern Lebanon and the complications that are involved with that. Certainly complicated. It's no black and white here as to who suffers and who instigates. So at least it feels like the fires have died down a little bit as of late in Southern California. So there's one less thing to draw our attention and cause us worry. But for now, the book of Proverbs, and we'll get to a section. At the end of this section, there's a phrase that I find cheerful and optimistic. Okay. So, Manny, would you like to read? Are you up for reading the first section? A little bit long. I'll remind everybody we did the first part of chapter 8 last week, in which Wisdom herself took the microphone and talked to us directly. Now we're back to I'm sorry, I've got some noise issues with somebody here. Getting an echo of sorts. And now it's off. So let's go back to, if you're not speaking, if you could mute yourself. And I don't know what that's about. Magdalena, any ideas? Let me try this and see. I'll mute. I'll have you unmute yourself in just a minute, man, and trying to find the reason for the feedback. At least on my end, there doesn't seem to be anything right now. Let's try it again, Manny. Okay. So as she continues to speak, Wisdom, Lady Wisdom, speaking to us herself. Chapter 8, verses 22 going onward.
The Lord created me at the beginning of his course, as the first of his works of old. In the distant past I was fashioned. At the beginning, at the origin of earth, there was still no deep when I was brought forth, no springs rich in water. Before the foundations of the mountains were sunk, before the hills I was born. He had not yet made earth and fields, or the world's first clumps of clay. I was there when he set the heavens into place, when he fixed the horizon upon the deep, when he made the heavens above firm, and the fountains of the deep gushed forth, when he assigned the sea its limits, so that its waters never transgress his command. When he fixed the foundations of the earth, I was with him as a confidant, a source of delight every day, rejoicing before him at all times, rejoicing in his inhabited world, finding delight with mankind.
Okay. Initial reactions. Dan, I see a smile. What does the smile belie?
Oh, two things. One, it's a very strong personification. A couple of things. There's still some, at least in the translation, I haven't looked at the Hebrew, of echoes of the beginning of Genesis, some of the words. And the other thing that occurred to me in reading this is this personification of qualities like wisdom is something common to, say, other systems of mythology, like um, you know, the Greek mythology we studied in school.
Right, Sophia, yeah, absolutely. And of course, the other mythologies or other wisdom traditions that most of us, including me, don't have so much access to, perhaps because I was the TA once for a professor who taught me. I had a little bit more, but to the Egyptian and Mesopotamian literary traditions that talk about wisdom and also personified. So that's yeah, and that's a continuation of last week, of course. And we've had it since the beginning but not as detailed here. And because the personification here is historical. It's a chronicle of from how far, or as my title for today was, it's as if wisdom is saying to God, oh, we go way back. Or wisdom is saying to us human beings, oh, my relationship with God, we go way back. You're just here. You see that sometimes, when you have a group dynamic and there's people that have been in the group for a long time, they want to preserve their seniority and their credit, and they'll say to one person to another. I've noticed this in many groups. They're like, oh, was it 4 years ago or 5 years ago, or what who was it that we talked to? Immediately, I'm sure you've seen this before, immediately excluding 98% of the group to show that they're what we call vatikim, they're veterans, they've been in the group for a long time. And so wisdom is doing that here. Of course, fascinating because it's a human being who's writing these words. But what's the danger in this? What's the fine line, Dan, between wisdom talking about being there at creation and being personified? I mean, what's the challenge here? Anything? Anybody? Theologically speaking,
Deifying another element
it
separate from
feels
God.
like it's pretty close. It's getting close to deification, isn't it? Um, Especially the way the first sentence is in the Hebrew, Adonai koneni reshit darko. So God created me, and the word koneni is from the root kana, which means to acquire something usually. But there are other times in the Hebrew Bible where kano has to be is a creation. In poetic Hebrew, in Psalms, for instance, kinyano. It's in one of the Psalms that is part of, I think is part of Kabbalah, traditional Kabbalah Shabbat. Kinyano being the God's creation is God's that which God has acquired, but really means created. And semantically, they're very, very close to each other, right? In both cases, they're possessive. But what stuck in my mind, which is why immediately as putting this sheet together, I put it in bold, is right, it got the beginning of God's way, the beginning of God's course, the beginning of God's career, if you will. God, whoa, 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 whoa. What does that mean? What about God being timeless, was, is, and will be? So there's a beginning to God? It's a theological challenge. And again, as many of you know, that's not my strong point, my strong card. It would be really interesting to delve deep here and see which of the Jewish philosophers took this on. What does Maimonides have to say about this, for instance? I don't know. I didn't get that far in preparation. But I did see what Rashi wrote here. If everybody looks down beneath the sky right away, I saw, because I knew that Rashi would. I had a feeling that Rashi would relate to this, because at the beginning of God's way, before the creation of the world, Rashi, no, don't start thinking it's anything else. Before the creation of the world. But of course, God existed before the creation of the world as well. So it's a tricky thing, but it's what happens when you bring this personification, when you really develop it. And wisdom, if wisdom is so great, then it feels like wisdom is around. And we'll have something else to say about that further down the line when we get to the fifth line from the bottom, Veheye Itzlo Amon. But okay, so that's one thing. Dan, you mentioned the creation story in Genesis. But if you were comparing this in a point by point, how close would it be to Genesis? 95%, 100%, 50%, 10%, 20%? Just, you've got to unmute first.
Feels like just the very beginning. Uh,
So I was
I
kind of
guess
hoping.
the one phrase that's pumping out. So okay, a
Go ahead.
percentage,
You don't have to. I was just, that was just,
20%.
yeah, not as much as maybe we would think, right?
Yeah.
What's clear, it has to do with creation story, but which creation story? And as you know, Dan, and many others here know, that there are many different creation stories in the ancient Near East. But not only that, in our Tanakh as well. Psalms has different versions. They're not entirely different. First of all, Genesis has two different versions, right? The second version, that is, or it's earlier version, but it comes in chapter 2, where it's not good for man to be alone. There's nothing cosmic of it's that's not a cosmic. Maybe I'm not using the word cosmic right, but it's not a cosmic creation story. All it has to do with the earth. It all takes place on the earth itself, and it's very, very anthropocentric. It's very revolves around the man, Adam, and then Eve as it goes on. But this is similar. I was hoping that Rabbi Malka would be here today because she's pretty well versed in other parts. And there's a famous chapter from Job. I've never studied Job from the beginning to the end, but there is a chapter that comes up a lot in different contexts, and that's Job 38. So if somebody wants to do, it's too long for us to read together here, I think, but it feels to me like this is kind of a spin. This is a later spin on Job 38. Basically, Job 30 is where God says to Job, when God feels Job's getting a little bit uppity, a little bit chutzpahdik with his argumentation, God says, well, excuse me, were you there when I created the world? Were you there when I did this? When I did it's like this rhetorical pushing down and down and down, humbling of Job in the story or in the text there. And this feels like it's almost a sidebar to that. Yes, it's kind of like wisdom. I imagine in my mind, wisdom is saying to humanity, "Oh, remember what God said to Job about you were nowhere near that, whatever." Yeah, but I was. In other words, I'm an entity, not a deity. I don't think it's deifying, but I'm an entity, but I was there along with God. We're gonna skip to the fourth verse, and we'll see more on this in the Talmud afterwards, in the Midrash. But if you can see the fifth line before the end, I was with him as a confidant. And that word amon, which is from the shorish, the root aleph mem dal nun, which also is amen, is from that. Um, eh, uh, we say in modern Hebrew, if Ella was here, she'd say mishpacha ma'amenet is a fostering family. The word is used with Esther and Mordechai, what Esther was to Mordechai in Mordechai's home. So there's basically more or less three different meanings for that root aleph mem nun when it's in a nominal form, and one is artisan, an artisan, like those that went to Hebrew speaking camps know we used to go to Omanut or Amanut or Omanut. That was arts and crafts, Omanut. An Aman is an artist in modern Hebrew. And then there's also something which is constantly, and that's where Amen comes from, and Emunah, belief, like Emunah, the women's group, which belongs to the Paul Mizrahi, I think. That's something which is constant. So there's artisan, there's something which is constantly, and there's also the meaning of ward or nursling, somebody who's being brought up. And although I don't know how they got to confidant here, maybe because you're spy, I was by God's side all the time. But Fox has a lovely understanding. And he says it's as if, yeah, I think it's Fox, and maybe he's quoting somebody else. Um, it's as if wisdom is saying, I grew up together. I was with God as I grew up. I learned from God. I was kind of God's protege almost. Maybe a word here would be protege. And it's an interesting, and it does fit into all this. I had a ringside seat when all this was happening. Again, I didn't do it, but I was there. And I think that the point of this paragraph is I learned from this. I saw all these things. I got to be there. I remember when I was putting together the rabbinic fellowship that I ran for 17 years called Rikma in Israel, and even actually until I got it was the final year was 2017, so I was still long distance kind of involved in it over the last years. We closed the nonprofit down in Israel in 2017, and I mention that now because the woman who was by my side in running that program is a woman named Mor Buchnik, and some of you had her for Hebrew study at Isaiah years ago. And she's coming tomorrow to visit. So if any of you were, I know that Richard was, but if any of you, I know Claire, if any of you were studying Hebrew with Mor, and you want to meet up with her this weekend, then let me know and we'll make it happen. Okay. But so I remember in formulating, yes, Richard?
I just had this thought that we have a mythology of that with age comes wisdom. So is this like saying that I'm an old person, so I'm wise? Although now that I'm old myself, I've discovered that it is a mythology because many old people simply aren't wise, but they're supposed to be.
Right. Or it applies to most people, just not you. That could be a possibility.
Well, it applies to me. That doesn't apply to anybody else.
So here's the thing, Richard. I don't think it's because you are old, one is old in body and years. It's because one has the experience of living
Experience,
through
right?
all
Old
this.
experience, right?
Right. Old is, we don't always say, we sometimes people if it's not an automatic thing with the years that tick by. It has to do with how much world experience you have as well. I think that's part of it that is often goes unmentioned. When I was formulating the fellowship program, an important component was of these rabbis, these Israelis who were studying to be rabbis and other communal professionals that had to do with spiritual community, was that they get the experience, that they do internships. Now, internships are pretty prevalent right now, but they were less so. I mean, how many people of our age here had internships? When you think of it I mean, think of your children, your grandchildren what they want to put on their applications for university and things like that. The amount of internships are just all over the place, right? And it's a good thing. But it wasn't done. It wasn't done in the Israeli rabbinical schools, unfortunately, not really. And what I did was build in. They were funded for 4 years, the 4 years of school. It was each of the schools were rabbinical schools were 4-year programs, and I gave them quite a bit of money per month so they wouldn't have to work. Because Israeli rabbinical students are always adults and they often have families. I had 3 children when I started. In my second year, we had 5 children already. So we always had to work, but I wanted to relieve them of having to work, but instead to get really good experience and had them challenge them to do things in the rabbinic or communal leadership field that they had not done until that time and that they were not inclined to do, to give them that kind of life experience. And what wisdom is saying here is that I got to do an internship with God. That's my point in all this. I was God's intern. I think that's, instead of confident, that's how I would translate it here in a hyper modern translation, even slang. I was God's confident, or stage, as we say in Israel and in European languages. I was God's stage or stagiaire. Stagiaire. Um, by the way, it was done in law and legal education, but most so what education has the most. When I was in preparing Rikma, I was in this 2-year fellowship myself, and we were exposed to different modes of professional training. And of course, what's the professional training that has the most, even to this day, I think, the most hands-on intern experience? Medicine. Yeah. Okay, Rita Claire, did you want to say something?
I think I do. I I believe that there are some Christian religions that would interpret this to mean that there was the Word, which the Word became Jesus, and that's who they believe he is speaking to.
Excellent point. That and that indeed becomes, with Christianity, becomes a kind of a tug of war going on. What is this wisdom? Is wisdom the same as logos, or does logos come to replace we replace wisdom, and of course many of us are in the John group. We're influenced. We're thinking of that first chapter of the Gospel according to John, in which in the beginning there was the Logos. So very much so, Rita Claire. Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
But of course, this is earlier than that by at least a few hundred years, right?
Mhm.
Not to mean that it's more real or it's more authentic. No, that's not what I mean in any way. But it's interesting to see these spins or these possible progressions in the same way that I thought that the human condition of saying to God, God, you are being unjust. Look at the suffering I'm going through. And then God saying in the book of Job to humanity through his God's speech to Job, take it easy. Take a deep breath, young man. You don't know so much to ask that question. You don't really have that's not a legitimate question. You don't really know what's going on so much. And then that morphing into wisdom saying, yes, but I do because I was there. And then of course in the traditions, in the Christian traditions of Jesus, Jesus was there as well because Jesus is part of God. Right?
Mhm.
Interesting stuff. And an interesting way that our studies are dovetailing or overlapping in this today. Yeah.
Mhm.
Thank you for that. Perfect. Um, okay. So I don't know that we need to go into the different details of the creation here. It's poetic, so it's going to be repetitive, but you can imagine different things here. If it says, um, you know, pillars, what did I see? Maybe it was above the fountains of deep. Because these features of these different things are part of the creation story that is reflected in different places in Psalms and I think in some prophetic literature as well. In other words, it's out there. Not all, there were many ways of talking to children or talking to people of telling that story of the creation and how the world came into being. And this is kind of one of them. It's based on one of them. It talks about this very, very grandiose thing that's happening on this earth. There's nothing here. I mean, what's not here? I'll ask you. What's not in the story in the background of the creation story here? It's kind of going back to the question I had to Dan, what percentage of this really echoes Genesis?
He didn't create man.
Right. Nothing about human beings, nothing about animals or birds or even trees. That's on one hand. And there's also nothing about stars, right? Stars and sun and moon. So it's very much it's the physical part of the earth itself. Don't know what that means, but I'm just pointing it out. Okay, anything else on this before we see what the Babylonian Talmud does with this? Anything else based on the contextual meaning here?
The very the very last line, finding delight with mankind.
Yeah. So maybe start
That
3 lines up. Take it as a 4-line
yeah.
section. The word here, sorry, right, shashua. Shashua, which means playfulness as well, not just delight, but right, a source of delight every day, rejoicing before God at all times, rejoicing in God's inhabited world, finding delight with humanity. Yeah, delight and rejoicing. So I'm glad you brought that up. Fox quotes a medieval commentator, Nachmias, and I have the book someplace. Yeah, it's one of those. I think I know maybe where it is. It might be a show, but Nachmias is a 14th century, early 14th century, I think, 13th or 14th century. Um, uh, don't remember, maybe Spanish. I don't remember where. Um, commentator, and he says his words in Hebrew are simchat havana, the joy of understanding. It's kind of like when you solve a puzzle, right? Maybe, but that's kind of a shallow example of, when you get Wordle, not on the first. To get Wordle on the first, that's just pure luck, right? But an excuse, and when you get it on the sixth, it says phew, phew, right? You've got it right. And or are there 6 or 5, whatever it is. But if you get it on 3, I think 3 is actually the one to do it on two is still part of luck, but to get on the three, I'm most proud of the threes that I have. I think there's that satisfaction. Of course, that's a shallow example as well, but the satisfaction of understanding something. Simchat havana. Moshe Greenberg, my teacher, Professor Moshe Greenberg, when he said, I was driving him home once, and I worshiped the man, right? I was so enamored by Professor Moshe Greenberg of blessed memory, and it was rough. He was very, very rough on me. And I drove him home once because I had a car, not a lot of students had a car, and I saw he was leaving. I said I knew he lived in my general neighborhood and taking back. So he said he was trying to make conversation. He says, "So what do? You must have to work, right? I understand you have a family." And yeah, I was a graduate student by that point. And I said, "Yes, I do. I do this." And I work with my friend, with Zakovich and Shainan, these two other teachers of mine who I quote a lot, and they were closer to my age, and we were a very friendly basis. And I said, although I know that many people critique their work, this project we were working on, because some people said, what is, ma chidush? Another professor had said to me once, who I'd taken home, who didn't like them. And I says, so what's the new thing? What are you prove? What are they saying? In all this work that they're doing, what's the new thing with it? And I remember Moshe Greenberg said to me, a chidush, the novel idea is that you understand. That it didn't have to be something new that wasn't written about something else. The new thing was the simcha, the joy was in understanding. You've laid out that understanding, and and I think that's important. That's important wisdom to itself as well. The fact that we understand something, even though it might not be a new idea as far as the world's concerned, as far as research is concerned, as far as the community, is that we see something, we understand. There's a joy in that understanding, and on the other side of that is there's some unhappiness and some stress, I think, that many of us feel when we don't understand something, right? Is it the opposite of joy? Is it sadness? Perhaps. Be interesting thing for us to think about, though, when we deal with things and there's something we don't understand.
Sorry.
Yeah, all of us have it, sorry. Okay, we'll be on the lookout for Arya and Alana Maldonado.
Maldonado.
Yeah. Okay. Which does remind me, it's not exactly the same thing, sorry but I met with my clergy friends yesterday, as we do once a month, and one of the things we discussed was how might our communities be involved in somehow alleviating, somehow helping this new situation with asylum seekers, refugees in our neighborhood. And so I hope to have some sort of new, something that we can actually be involved in, those of us that want to be involved um, yeah, and not just complain about it. And not, yeah, that another source of joy is to actually do something about something as opposed to just talking about it. Um, anyway, back to understanding. Well, good. All right. Anything else?
Um,
Yes, I think.
and the seventh day, there's no rest in here.
Another thing, right? Because again, it's not there to talk about creation, although that could raise this, and it would have been cool had wisdom said, "Oh, and yes, by the way, I too rested on the seventh day," right? Whatever that means. How does wisdom really rest on? We actually look forward to Shabbat as being a day of growing in wisdom, don't we? Usually, of that time to. So yes, but that only goes to show, Eileen, that this is the purpose of mentioning creation is not to talk about the creation. It's not about the creation story. This is not where you go. This is a story that utilizes at least one of the traditions about the creation, and doesn't seem to be the traditions we have in Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. And my thesis is that it may be connected to Job Job 38. Okay. Yes, Roberta.
Very positive. I mean, in a way, it's much more beautifully done. I mean, most of the things when we study, it's dictums from above for how awful we are and how many things we're supposed to do every day that we don't, and constantly berating us for not living up to the standards that are set. Here, it's a very more warm, inviting, personal message.
I totally agree. I think that perhaps the two of you were not present last week. But you are right until the beginning of chapter 8, everything was about, it seemed like everything was about the stick. And suddenly in chapter 8, we get the carrot. Wisdom is talking about herself in a very positive form. Absolutely. This is far more pleasant, right? This is the simcha, the joy of understanding in with positive reinforcement as opposed to the negative. Good point. Yeah, absolutely. Dan, would you read from us from Babylonian Talmud Nidarim, which has to do with vows and the exact context of this particular passage I didn't look up. But in any case, go ahead.
7 phenomena were created before the world was created: Torah and repentance, the Garden of Eden and Gehenna, the throne of glory and the temple, and the name of the Messiah. Torah. As it's written in Proverbs, the Lord made me as the beginning of his way.
Before we go on, you see what he's done, what they've done here, right? What the Talmud has done here, which we've seen in other places of rabbinic literature as well. That wisdom and Torah are the same. And the book of Proverbs does not necessarily say that. There may be an existence of wisdom which is independent of Torah, I think. Interesting question for us to pursue. Go ahead.
Repentance, as it is written, before the mountains are brought forth, or ever you had formed the earth and the world, even from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. And it was written immediately afterward, you return man to contrition, and you say, repent, children of man.
So if we were to look in Psalm 90, we'd see a more similar type of creation story in the background there, except for Psalm 90's focus is on behavior of humanity, hence the connection with repentance.
Of Eden, as it is written, the Lord God planted a garden in Eden eastward.
Okay, anybody understand that? Because that's not self-evident.
Well, the fact that there's something,
Go
yeah.
ahead.
So I'm looking in the text for something that
No,
is
it's
like
actually,
that.
it's a play on
Yeah,
words with the Hebrew
yeah, I
meaning.
see it.
In
Yeah,
Genesis.
Merosh Mikad Me Aretz.
Yeah, but the text here, okay, they are connected. The word kedem means east, but it also means beforehand. And what's the connection between east and beforehand?
Sun comes up in the east. That's the beginning of the
Exactly.
day.
Exactly. The beginning of the day beforehand comes before our orientation, literally, right? Our orientation is from east to west. And so yeah, and so the play on words which is done in Genesis 2 is that while the text in Genesis is geographical, the God planted a garden in Eden, meaning eastward, it here is it planted a garden beforehand, before the creation, existed before the creation. A playful play on words. Go ahead.
Gehenna, as it is written, for its hearth is ordained of old.
Right, because Gehenna or Gehennim or hell, as we're thinking, is a hot place. Hence that play on words there.
Throne of glory, as it is written, your throne is established of old. You are from everlasting.
Right? And also all these words are there's a lot like that's in the third line, me'olam, nisachti, as the first of God's work of old, me'olam. Go ahead.
The temple, as it is written, your throne of glory on high from the beginning, in the place of our temple. And find the
From the
name of the
beginning.
Messiah,
Right. Go ahead. Yeah.
as is written, may his name endure forever. His name existed before the sun.
Right. And that's actually explicit there. That's an explicit that they don't have to fetch that one so much. That one is showing that the institution of Mashiach, of the Anointed One, is one that was always it's, we've been doing this forever. We've had this tradition forever. Right. Okay. Any comments or questions? The reason I brought that, of course, is because of our verse, really, the only one that really is this idea that lest you say, how could wisdom be created beforehand, before humanity, for instance? Oh, there were 7 things that were created before humanity, including, by the way, that which humanity needs in order to do better in life, repentance, right? Or that which humanity needs in order to come to redemption, which is Mashiach, or that which humanity needs to fear from the stick of punishment, to do the right thing, Gehenna, etc. Okay, Dan, I'm going to ask you to go on to the second page to read from Midrash Rabbah. Now we're talking about that word emun, amun, that aleph mem nun, ahma.
Rabbi Hoshea the Great began. I was with him as an Ammon, a delight day after day. Ammon means a child's caretaker. Ammon means covered. Ammon means hidden. And some say Ammon means greatness. Ammon means a child's caretaker, as it says in Numbers, as a caretaker carries a nursing child. It means covered, as it says in Lamentations, those covered in scarlet. Ammon means hidden, as it says. He was Omein Hadassah, Esther.
About Esther, that's Mordechai and Esther.
Yeah. Ammon means great, as it says. Are you better than No Ammon, which sits in the rivers? Which we translate in Targum, are you better than the great city of Alexandria, which is located among the rivers? Another matter, Ammon means artisan, Aman. The Torah is saying, I was a tool of craft of the Holy One, blessed be he. The way of the world is that when a flesh and blood king builds a palace, he does not build it based on his own knowledge, but rather he has plans on sheets and tablets by which to ascertain how he should build its rooms, how he should build
Maybe
its...
you skipped a line. Does not build it based on his knowledge, but rather.
and the artisan does not build it based on its own knowledge. Did I skip it? I didn't think so.
Anyway,
Okay.
but rather.
Yeah, okay. The way of the world is that when the flesh and blood king builds a palace, he does not build it based on his own knowledge, but rather based on the knowledge of an artisan. I see. And the artisan does not build it based on his own knowledge, but rather he has plans on sheets and tablets by which to ascertain how he should build its rooms, how he should build its doors. So too, the Holy One, blessed be he, looked in the Torah and created the world. The Torah says, Bereshit, God created, and Reshit is nothing other than the Torah. As it says, the Lord made me at the beginning of Reshit, his way.
So this is a little bit different, right? This is an interesting spin or take on that first part. It's not only that it's not the way that the simple meaning of the text seems to tell us that Proverbs that wisdom was there from the beginning, learning by watching God. No. Wisdom was the tool that God used. Wisdom was the architectural plans. Was that the roles of things, and that the architect came and spread in front of her the computer program. And this dovetails with other other rabbinic traditions that say that God created the world with the template of the Torah. The Torah was God's template. And therefore the ancestors, in particular, they talk about the rabbinic sources talk about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They kept the Torah, and the Torah hadn't been given yet until Sinai. So how did they know? I remember one of the early things I learned as a teacher, they looked into creation. They could look at the creation and understand, oh, that must be it's kind of like they were physicists, right? They looked at what they had and they broke it down and figured out how it came into being. Yeah, so this would be I see this, and wouldn't this be a great thing to say at a party of somebody who gets a who's just earned a degree in architecture or maybe physics as well. This would be a great thing for a Nobel Prize winner, a physicist prize to incorporate in there. This is something I would have used. I think I've shared with you before. As the rabbi of Stockholm, I had the honor of greeting any of the Nobel Prize winners who came to synagogue on that Friday and that Shabbat. And there was always a Jew. I can't, the 3 years there, at least one of them, and sometimes many of them were Jews and or Israelis who were Jewish as well in this case. And we always had somebody. One of them visited, or the family visited, and I was able to give a Dvar Torah, my sermon that day. I was able to most cleverly incorporate something from that person's research, which that was fun. That was a lot of fun. I would say I remember being apropos the Academy Awards are around now, right? I think I saw something on the news. I remember saying to Sasha, I said, what's the difference between living in Sweden and living in the United States is that the excitement of the year is who won the Nobel Prize in what area, as opposed to who won the best actor. Who, again, I understand the cultural importance of movies as well. I enjoy, but to me, if I had to get one of them, I'd rather have a Nobel Prize than an Academy Award. Okay, sermon is over. This last sermon is over. Anything else on this before we go on to this second session for today? Yes, Rita Claire.
Would you please, I don't mean to go back, but would you explain Gehenna to me?
Yeah, no, not really. Yeah. I'll tell you what it stands for. What Christians would call hell.
Yes, no, I understand that, but I had also thought that Gehenna was referred to as the grave.
Yeah, so Gehenna comes from Gehinom. Gehinom are two words. Ge means ravine, like ravine or valley or canyon, and Hinnom is the name of somebody who owned the land. I'm pretty sure that's what, and that was an area outside of the city of Jerusalem, where today, those of you who've been to Jerusalem, it's in between the Cinematheque and Mount Zion. It's that ravine that's there, and that is also where Rita Claire, the area was. Oh, not Popper's Field. What the field where Judas Iscariot was buried? What's that called? Anybody from the Gospels? Anybody remember?
Pottersfield.
Potter's Field, yeah, that's the same area, and that was thought to be kind of haunted. That's kind of what I remember doing research when I was teaching Matthew, and that area was thought to be kind of often because it was a burial place, and burial places in many traditions are not the kind of place you want your kids to play in, right? And so that gave, as far as I know, that gave the name for the bad place, and that eventually became hell, right? Yeah. Does that kind of explain?
Mm, I, I guess I think of it more as being a place of burial place, a place of no return, so to speak. So my question was, so therefore, death entered into the creation story right away.
Well, remember, this is the rabbis that are writing this in the first half of the first millennium of the Common Era, right? So they have a developed belief in Gehenna, which doesn't exist in the Hebrew Bible. Hebrew Bible has a place called Sheol, capital Sheol, where nothing happens. That's the underworld, the netherworld, but there's nothing that goes on there. We have no description of anything that goes on there. There's no burning cauldrons of fat or iron or torture things and things like that.
Right,
Uh,
right.
but those ideas came out of, I think, Greco-Roman culture. They influenced early Judaism and hence Christianity as well. And it just happens to be the word that's used for it is a place that at the time of the first few century or the first century of the Common Era was thought to be an icky place. That's kind of my elementary knowledge of this. I think that's other than that, I don't really know it was that well developed. But if you look, for instance, on Gehenna or Gehenom in the Jewish tradition, you'll probably get to an article from the first Jewish encyclopedia. That seems to be what happens very often on. It's well marked from a Google point of view. And then you'll get some earlier sources about this. It would probably be from the Encyclopedia Judaica or the Jewish Encyclopedia from like the beginning of the 20th century. Okay, let's go on to the second section of wisdom. And Eileen, do you want to read this? We're at chapter 8, 32 to 36.
Sure. Wisdom's love for humanity. Now, sons, listen to me. Happy are they who keep my ways. Heed discipline and become wise. Do not spurn it. Happy is the man who listens to me, coming early to my gates each day, waiting outside my doors. For he who finds me finds life and obtains favor from the Lord. But he who misses me destroys himself. All who hate me love death.
Roberta, you happy? We're back to the negativity now.
Oh boy, are we ever?
All right, so reactions, folks, comments, questions.
You better, you better, you better, you better keep my ways. There's no two ways about it.
Right?
And it also, I'm surprised, it says, come early to my gates each day, which means go to synagogue daily.
Well, I don't think it meant in Proverbs. I don't think they had the reality of a synagogue. I think it probably meant devote your time to study, to learning wisdom from the very beginning of the day. In the Jewish liturgy, you may know this blessing, Roberta, that we say on Shabbat before we do Torah study, which is on page 5 in our Or Midbar prayer book, is actually the blessing for Torah study and not for reading of the Torah. It's not Asher Bacharbanu Mikol Amim V'Natananu Et Torah. That's when you're called for an aliyah as one of the people to read from the Torah. But to me, it's more appropriate to say the blessing for the study of Torah, which is one of the morning blessings in the prayer book, Jewish prayer book. And the way that it's written out, I don't remember if it's already Talmudic, but certainly from an old halachic point of view, is you say that blessing, and then right away you say some verses from the Torah, something from the Mishnah, and something from the Gemara, from the Talmud, so that you've kind of covered the basic bodies of knowledge, Torah, Mishnah, and Talmud. And so that God forbid you don't say that blessing and the blessing goes to waste. So because you don't want to do a bracha levatala, a wasted blessing. And so it is built into our liturgy that you study Torah from the very beginning. And a lot of people have practices to do things like that every morning, right? It might be people have things that they want to make sure they do every day, they do in the morning, or to set the tone for the day, meditation or exercise or whatever it would be, or Wordle. Right? So perhaps doing Wordle the first thing in the morning that'll exempt you or that'll fulfill this obligation here. But yes, it's like do it. It's like voting, right? Vote early and vote often. Is that what we say? Right? No, God forbid. No, we don't say that. But doing something early and doing something often. Right. Okay. Anybody else? Okay, then. Dan, you want to do for us Babylonian Talmud Shabbat? So we're gonna the two Talmudic passages are going to focus on that last line: "All who hate me love death." Right? All who hate me love death. This either you're with me in either you go to college or you die. Okay, or you read a book a day, whatever it is. You got to develop your wisdom and interesting. There's a Talmudic phrase that is. I think it's o chavruta o mituta, which was understood by the rabbis to give me either a study partner or give me death. What's the famous thing or something? Give me liberty, give me death. Who said that? What is it? Who's that a quote of?
Patrick Henry.
Patrick. Okay, so give me liberty or death. This is give me Torah study or give me death. It's not that, Okay. All right, Dan, go ahead and read from the Talmud for us.
Rabbi Bar Abba said, the Rabbi Yochanan said, the Torah scholar on whose clothes a fat stain is found is liable to receive the death penalty, as it is stated. All those who hate me love death. And the sages said, do not read, those who hate me, Masanai. Rather read, those who cause me to be hated, Masniai. And those who cause people to hate the Torah by creating the impression that those who study Torah are unclean deserve the death penalty.
What are your reactions to this, Eileen? And I'm asking you on purpose.
If you don't study, well, you mean as a Reformed Jew in an Orthodox neighborhood, if you don't study Torah every day, you're not really a Jew.
That's one aspect of it, right? But how about you looking at the Orthodox Jews, at the ultra-Orthodox who go to yeshiva and the way they dress? Does it ever occur to you to say that's representing our tradition?
No, I think they're keeping the tradition, actually.
Well, they're keeping a tradition. Let's
A
be
tradition, right?
historically honest, give a very particular narrow tradition of Ashkenazic Jews, and it's you know, my best example are those that are Hasidic and they wear a shtreimel or a
Right.
spodik, the two different versions of fur hats on Shabbat, which is, you know, happens to be the tradition of the wealthy non-Jews of those countries that were imitated for on Shabbat. But this idea that if somebody's a Torah scholar or a professor or a leader of any kind, the way they look, they should be careful about how they dress, right? Careful about how cleanly it's not to be with a disheveled appearance, whatever. There's this kind of connection between the inside and the out, which is brought here, and it's done on this play on words. Where Dan, where you stumbled was you're trying to make sense of how did they get from a death penalty because it says all who love me, you know, and it has to do with your PR, with your image, your outward image. Um, and then Rabbi Yochanan, another thing about wisdom, the reason I brought the second tradition that I'm asking you to read in just a second from Megillah, is that, so what is wisdom and how do we impart wisdom? How do we transfer? How do we transfer wisdom, pass on wisdom from one generation to the next? And part of the Talmudic tradition is to quote something according to who said it. That's like and Talmud says that's how you bring redemption to the world, by quoting people, giving people credit for those who said it. But what happens when you have this oral tradition in which somebody said, no, Rabbi Yochanan said this, and I said, no, I heard quite different. Or did Rabbi Yochanan say different things on two different occasions? Or so what are our sources of wisdom, epistemology, right? How do we know news? This is right. This is stuck in all of our throats right now. How do we know what we know? How do we have the opinions that we have? Um, you know, thought of it just this morning in parking the car before class today, coming back. NPR, we give you da 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 da, whatever they say on NPR, whatever. And I said, yes, that's why for me, NPR is a reliable source. But of course, it's them telling me what they're doing, right? So how did they become the reliable source, and how did they become such a hated source by other people? And those are the interesting questions that I think we need to deal. But let's go see what else Rabbi Yochanan said, or somebody else's version of Rabbi Yochanan's, what he said.
Rabbi Yochanan said, any Torah scholar who allows someone else to bless grace after meals in his presence, even if that person is a high priest who is an ignoramus, then that Torah scholar is liable to receive the death penalty for belittling his own honor.
Okay, so just before, to explain the question, Rabbi Yochanan is talking about this idea of receiving the death penalty because of not doing something disrespectful to oneself, not demanding respect for oneself, demanding with clean clothes in the first tradition that we read. This one is demanding first dibs on doing something, leading the grace after meal, saying Chaverai nevarech, or what was done there, Rabotai nevarech. That honor goes according to tradition to the Kohen. If there's no Kohen, or the Kohen says, somebody else, then it goes to everybody. I don't think in that case it goes to a Levi. Um, but but then it goes to the greatest scholar in the room. But what happens when you have a high priest? That's the highest. Yes, but what happens when you have a high priest who's not knowledgeable, which was the case in the first century when the high priesthood was being bought for money, so it didn't have to do with merit. So this idea of demanding one's honorable place in society, that's what's behind this. And what's the proof for that? Rabbi Yochanan asks.
As it is stated, all those who hate me love death. Do not read it as those who hate me, Masanai. Rather read it as though it said, those who make me hated, Masniai. When Rabbi Parita says this, he was speaking of people of equal stature.
The only, I'm not sure I fully understand everything here, other than to say that it's not, how you present yourself is how, not only how you present yourself physically with your clothes, but in this version of Rabbi Yochanan, it's how you present yourself in the pecking order of what's done, demanding your place of honor as somebody who is a representative of wisdom in this case, and that's how it's a representative of Torah. And that brings us back to what Eileen said. It kind of combines both of those ideas are combined in the comment that Eileen made about her neighbors who feel that if you're not ultra orthodox, if you're not a Torah scholar, then you are not the right one. In other words, you do not have that place of honor. And this combination of both those things, yeah, this is a little bit of insight, I think, into why there are rabbinic rabbis and other other Orthodox and ultra-Orthodox Jews that do dress a certain way and carry themselves in a certain way as well. Yeah, and then we of course we would transfer that to politicians in our country. Does that work, or to professors or leaders, or you know? Yeah. Anything else? Any reactions, questions, or comments? Okay. Well, that was Lady Wisdom speaking up for herself. I'll see some of you tomorrow when we try to tackle the glory of God and the Spirit, the Holy Spirit, in the Gospel according to John. And as many of you have seen, we have a new in-person class coming up in March, which I'll be doing with my friend Reverend Dan on the book of Jonah.
In person.
In person, yeah. All right, everybody. Have a lovely day. Thanks for
Thank
being
you.
here.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye. See you all.